You seriously lost, old-timer? Or is this some kind of prank?
Gunnery Sergeant Johnson's bark cracked through the tension on that sweltering rifle range. His eyes weren't scanning his Marines, but burning holes through me. An 82-year-old man in battered jeans and a faded shirt, quietly standing behind the firing line with a long, cloth-wrapped shape cradled in my hands. I didn't flinch. My body might be weathered, but my mind was sharp and my eyes missed nothing. Flags whipped and snapped all across the range, each signaling a different secret in the shifting wind. Most would see chaos, where I saw a silent story. The young Marines in front of me stood equipped with gadgets worth more than every vehicle I'd ever owned, yet confusion was all over their faces. "This is a live-fire range for force recon snipers," Johnson pressed, striding over, bulk and polished gear casting a shadow before him. His wrist bore a ballistic computer gleaming in the sun, easily worth a small fortune. "No civilians allowed. Sir, I need you to leave. Now." I took in the terrain one more time, then let my pale blue eyes the color of distant winter, settle on Sergeant Johnson. His hostility washed over me, absorbed like rain on old stone. I kept my voice low and steady. "Wind's tricky today," I said quietly. "It's not one wind out there, it's three." Johnson's laugh was short and sharp, disbelief written clear for all to see. Some of the younger Marines shifted, uncomfortable. I recognized that look. They'd been fighting this range all morning. Their devices spat back data that made no real-world sense. Their ballistic solvers churned out digital answers, but none of them could land a shot. The steel silhouette out at 1,700 yards, an impossible target. I'd designed more than a few of these so-called impossible shots in my time, but I kept that to myself. "Three wins, right?" Johnson mocked, folding his arms. "Listen, old man, I don't need homespun wisdom. We're tracking Coriolis, spin drift, barometric pressure shifting every 5 minutes, more complicated than checking for a breeze with your thumb." I just shrugged. "That computer? It can't spot the heat rising off those rocks at 1,000 yards. It can't feel the cold air sliding down that ravine left side. The target flag's lying. It's showing left to right, but the valley's tunneling the real wind just short of the target. You're solving one problem, the bullets flying through three." A silence rippled through the squad. One Marine, Evans, the lance corporal, lowers his spotting scope and risked a glance at me. He'd watched the boiling mirage all morning, making sense of what I said, but kept his thoughts hidden. "You don't cross a gunnery sergeant that easily." Johnson stiffened, bristling at what he saw as disrespect from a groundskeeper. Me, the old man he'd seen tending the barracks lawns. He glared at the bulky, cloth-wrapped item in my hands. "And let me guess, you could do better," he said, voice dripping sarcasm. "What's in there, Grandpa?" Grandpa's old squirrel gun. Deliberately, I started unwrapping the object. No polished modern chassis or electronics. Just weathered wood, oiled steel, and the kind of dings that come from 100 battles, not careless handling. The rifle was an M40, the legendary model from another era, an artifact most of these Marines had only glimpsed in museums. Now it sat, battered but whole, across my lap. A relic in their eyes. Johnson actually laughed, shaking his head. "You can't be serious. That old thing, it can't even reach the target, much less hit it. You're gonna hurt yourself." He pointed at a deep gouge near the bolt, as if proof of my rifle's uselessness, but as his finger jabbed at the old walnut stock, the world around me faded. Suddenly I was young again, 19 and thousands of miles away in steamy green hell. The Vietnam jungle was thick, choking, every inch humming with rain and danger. That gouge in my rifle still fresh, badges of survival. A mortar had landed close enough to bite. On my belly, just a thread of breath escaping, I waited, crosshairs steady. The wind, always a liar, rustled leaves and turned the rain's angle, but I read what mattered. The shiver of a single fern, the slant of drizzle. I squeezed the trigger, felt the recoil, heard only the jungle swallowing the shot. Reality snapped back in scorching sunshine. My hands, older, steadier, still holding that same rifle. I met Sergeant Johnson's glare with peace, not pride. He didn't know the story and every scratch of that wood. I did. Lance Corporal Evans shifted his weight, the tension in that silence pressing against his chest. He respected the uniform and he respected his gunny, but something about the blunt way Johnson dismissed me felt off. It wasn't just about protocol. It was about decency. I could see it in Evans's eyes, the hesitation, the urge to speak, but discipline keeping him rooted. Miller's jaw clenched, his pride pricked by the groundskeeper's calm. "That's enough," he snapped. He squared his shoulders like he was about to dress down a recruit. "You are trespassing on a military installation. You're a civilian, and you will comply. Or I'll have the MPs take you in." But there was no malice in me, only a quiet patience, the kind that comes from surviving storms far greater than this. My hands didn't tighten on the rifle. My stance didn't alter. "It's your call, Sergeant," I replied softly, my gaze steady. Evans' loyalty to his chain of command warred with an instinctual need to intervene. He found his out. "Gunny," he called, voice trembling just enough. "My scope's all messed up, reticles dancing, might be a nitrogen seal, gonna need repairs, permission to take it to the armory." Johnson barely looked his way. "Fine, Evans. Just get it fixed. No one's leaving until we get a hit." Evans shot off down the gravel lane, heart in his throat. He ducked behind a row of armored Humvees, pulled out his phone and flicked through contacts to a number he'd only heard whispered about. The call picked up, a gravelly voice on the other end. "Master Guns Randall speaking. It's Lance Corporal Evans, Charlie Company. I'm at Falcon Range with Gunny Johnson." Randall's tone was half amused, half expectant. "What happened? Drop a scope again, Evans?" "No, Master Guns. It's not that. The old guy from groundskeeping is out here. He brought an old M40. Gunny is getting ready to have him thrown out. He called him Frank Taylor." All humor vanished. For a beat, nothing but silence hummed through the line. When Randall finally spoke, his voice hardened with urgency. "You're telling me Frank Taylor is at your range right now?" Evans swallowed. "Yes, sir." "Gunny's about to have him cuffed. Stay there, Evans. No matter what, do not let your gunny put a hand on him. Keep them there until I arrive. That's an order." Randall hung up without another word. Back behind those trucks, Evans felt icy dread chill his bones. He'd poked something dangerous, started a chain reaction that couldn't be stopped. Far from the range, Colonel Nathaniel Harlow sat slumped in a stifling office, his patience drained by endless budget talk. The interruption, unmistakable and immediate, came from his aide, pale-faced and breathless. "Sir, urgent message from Master Gunnery Sergeant Randall." He used a Whiskey Falcon protocol. Harlow's eyes narrowed. There was no such protocol, not officially, but Randall didn't waste words. Without hesitation, Harlow answered the line. "This is Harlow." He listened, and as he did, his posture straightened, the old fire rekindling in his eyes. "Repeat that name. Are you absolutely certain he's on my range?" His knuckles went white. "Keep everyone there." "I'm on my way." He slammed the phone onto its cradle. "Captain, get my vehicle now. Sergeant Major to the entrance, 2 minutes. We're headed for Falcon Range, lights and sirens." Back where the heat radiated in shimmering waves over gravel, Johnson's patience snapped. He jabbed a finger in my face. "This is your last chance. I am giving a direct order. Vacate the range, or I'll personally place you under arrest." He stepped forward, hand clamping my shoulder, expecting resistance or fear. But I just looked up, calm, no rage, no panic, only a tired sadness. Then the air split with the distant wail of sirens, surreal and out of place on that raw patch of earth. Faces turned. Down the long dirt road, dust clouds rose. Evans was already back near the firing line, lips pursed, as two black command Humvees and a military police cruiser roared their way. Blue and red lights flashed, wheels biting gravel. The convoy screeched to a halt so fast that doors swung open before the vehicles had even stopped rolling. Out sprang Colonel Harlow, his uniform flawless, his face carved in cold fury. The base sergeant major, huge, looming, marched right at his side. All the Marines around me fell into stunned silence, dropping into rigid attention as instinct took over. Gunnery Sergeant Johnson's grip floated off my arm like he'd just touched an open wire. His face paled, baffled by the severity of what was now unfolding. Colonel Harlow strode forward, his boots crunching the gravel, all attention zeroed in on me. He didn't so much as glance at Johnson. Instead, his gaze fell immediately to where Johnson's hand had lingered on my shoulder, sharp and disapproving. Johnson jerked his hand away as if burned, eyes wide with confusion and dawning realization. He'd served for years, of course, used to commanding respect, yet never in his career had he seen the base's top brass arrive on a dusty rifle range, sirens still fading in the distance. The moment hung in the summer heat, heavy and expectant. Then, something almost unimaginable happened. Colonel Harlow, a man whose word was law for miles around, executed the crispest salute I'd ever received, spine iron rod straight, arm locked, respect radiating from every fiber. His voice rang out, clear and unwavering over the silent tableau. "Mr. Taylor, I sincerely apologize for the actions of my Marines today. There is absolutely no excuse for the disrespect you faced here." Gasps rippled through the assembled snipers, heads spinning between me and their stone-faced gunnery sergeant. Johnson stood frozen, jaw slack. The world as he'd known it utterly flipped. Suddenly he was no longer the dominant force. He was barely more than a bystander as the story unfolded. The base sergeant major swept over to Johnson, eyes cold enough to cut steel. In a voice pitched low for deadly seriousness, he growled, "Gunnery Sergeant, just what exactly did you think you were doing?" Harlow waited until I met his eyes and gave a tired, polite nod. Only then did the colonel lower his salute. He pivoted, now facing the row of young snipers, whose faces were a study in awe and confusion. His words came out hard, each syllable landing with the weight of command. "Marines, you've spent all day missing your mark because you convince yourselves that technology makes you marksmen. You have been humbled by a mile of open air, and in your frustration your leader chose to direct his contempt at a man whose boots he isn't fit to polish." He gestured toward me. "Let me introduce you properly. This is Chief Warrant Officer 5 Frank Taylor, USMC, retired, the man you just insulted." An uneasy shiver passed down the line, like a cold wind through tall grass. Eyes widened. Some mouths fell open. The reality hit. The old groundskeeper, the invisible presence around base, was a living piece of core history. The colonel's voice grew even sharper. "Frank Taylor wrote the book on extreme-range shooting, the doctrine you're supposed to be applying right now. In Vietnam, the enemy didn't bother naming their snipers, but they gave him a name. They called him the Ghost of the Valley." He let that settle, then fixed his gaze on Johnson. "Mr. Taylor holds the third longest confirmed shot in Corps history. He made it in a raging monsoon, winds 10 times worse than what you see out there today, and he did it with the same very rifle you just ridiculed." A hush blanketed the range. You could almost hear the reverence thrumming in the air. Harlow's gaze returned to me, his demeanor now formal, deferential. "Sir, would you do us the honor of demonstrating for these Marines how it's truly done?" I nodded, moving at a pace that was careful, not for show, just the deliberate patience of experience. I knelt by the firing mat, then stretched out on my belly with that old M40 nestled against my shoulder. Not a fancy bipod in sight, just the comfort of a battered rucksack, perfectly shaped by decades of use. I let the long experience fill me. My vision swept the length of the range. I looked past mere instruments. Your computers chase numbers, I told them quietly, stillness settling around my voice. But you have to watch the signs. The shimmer over those rocks at 1,000 yards, that's thermal flowing right to left. See the grass on the berm at 1,500? Barely moving, leaning your direction. At the far end, that target flag's trying to convince you things are simple. That's the main current, but it's a trick. There's a hidden role. You have to find the window, not just the wind. My hands moved over the old scope's windage and elevation knobs. No dials, no digital readouts, just the certainty of an old rhythm. I settled my cheek against the wood, ran through my breathing, half in, half out. Everything around me fell silent, even time itself. The M40's single shot cracked through the air, a different sound, older, round, and sharp. Every optic on the firing line snapped to the distant steel. 2.5 beats passed, then at last a sweet, unmistakable ping. Bullet on steel, an undeniable dead-center hit. Instantly, the range erupted with applause and shouts, the sharp-edged tension of the morning dissolving into a tidal wave of astonished respect. Marines who only minutes earlier had sized me up as a relic now found themselves on their feet, whooping and slapping each other on the back. Even Colonel Harlow let the faint trace of a smile slip across his face, just for a second, before his gaze turned icy once more, settling on Gunnery Sergeant Johnson. The colonel stepped over to Johnson, voice dangerously quiet. "Gunnery Sergeant, your pride has blinded you to your responsibility. You're not just here to hit the target. Your first duty is to make Marines better. Today, you ignored a living legend, a priceless resource ready to teach you for free. Instead, you treated him like an intruder. That's unacceptable." Johnson's face was rigid, mortification burning his ears bright red. He held himself upright, but his eyes were glued to the gravel, jaw clenched, all bravado long gone. "No excuse, sir," he managed hoarsely. "There is no excuse," Harlow confirmed. He turned to the wide-eyed group of snipers. "As of this moment, all of you, including your gunnery sergeant, are assigned to a full week of remedial training. Wind reading, fieldcraft, every lesson you just failed. Your instructor will be Mr. Taylor if he's willing to take you back to the basics you've neglected." The Marines didn't protest. Some looked relieved, some deeply embarrassed, and for a few the faint glint of excitement. Maybe they realized they were about to learn from the source. I rose carefully, old knees creaking, and walked over to Johnson. He couldn't meet my eyes. Gently, I placed my hand on the very shoulder where he'd gripped me in anger not an hour ago. I spoke quietly, without a trace of gloating. "Your gear is useful, son, but it's no substitute for what you've built up here." I tapped my temple so all could see. "The wind, the terrain, it doesn't care about your devices. You need to learn to interpret it. Listen with your senses, not just with your instruments." While the others listened, my fingers traced the familiar stock of my rifle. Its weight had always been strangely comforting, like a bridge connecting what I felt to what I knew and what I'd learned to what I could pass along. A memory surfaced, vivid and warm, from when I was only a corporal, barely 20, and as green as the rounds I carried on my belt. A master sergeant, gravely and scarred from the Chauzin Reservoir, pressed this same rifle into my hands. The stock was almost new then, the bluing dark. "She's not pretty," the old man had rasped, "but she'll never let you down. Don't trust what looks easy. The wind, the sun, the jungle, they all play tricks. But she speaks the truth, if you listen." That piece of advice, simple as it was, had seen me through more than a lifetime's worth of storms. The rifle wasn't just a tool, it was a legacy of wisdom. It was patience shaped into walnut and steel. In the weeks that followed, change swept through Falcon Range. Each day began the same. Sun burning the horizon, Marines sitting in a ragged semicircle on the scrubby ground, rifles set aside. Now it was my turn to teach. I'd settle onto an empty ammo crate or an old camp stool, holding not a rifle but a blade of grass between my fingers, or maybe a battered notebook. I showed them how a trembling leaf could reveal more than $1,000 sensor. I made them watch mirage boiling over hot rocks, how it twisted and bent, telling the story of invisible rivers in the air. We learned patience, learned to feel the thickness of humidity on our skin, to watch for the flick of a seed head or the subtle shudder of a wire running out by the target. I talked little about the old days, not out of modesty, but because what mattered most was teaching them how to read the world around them, not to cling to stories of the past. Over time, the tough posture of the Marines shifted. They started seeking subtlety, listening, watching, learning again. Even Johnson, the once proud gunny, settled in cross-legged every morning, silent, his focus sharp. One afternoon I caught him lingering after everyone else left, running his thumb along the battered stock of his own rifle, a thoughtful expression softening his face. The Marine Corps eventually revised its advanced sniper instruction. Instructors added something new to the syllabus, and though my name wasn't important to them, they called the section the Taylor Wind Doctrine. Quiet pride blossomed inside me whenever I heard it, knowing that soon a whole new generation would remember, in the middle of their most critical moments, to look up, to watch a flag or a trace of haze, and use something deeper than a microchip in the wind. A few weeks later, life's routine came knocking again. The world moved on, training cycles rotated, the morning ran under a new sun. I found myself wandering through the local hardware store on a Saturday, scanning through seed packets for this year's tomatoes. There, in the next aisle, I spotted Johnson in civilian clothes, brows furrowed, scrutinizing sprinklers. He looked up. His face broke into something humble, honest. "Mr. Taylor," he said, approaching with uncharacteristic softness. I smiled, the real grandfatherly kind. "How are your tomatoes doing, son?" He looked flabbergasted for a second. "You saw me planting them?" I nodded, giving him a wink. "Last week. You put them a little too close. If you don't thin them, they'll choke each other out." For the first time, Johnson laughed. Not out of frustration, but from a place of humility that cleansed rather than wounded. I just wanted to say, "Thank you. I learned more from your lessons than I have in 5 years behind the scope." I squeezed his shoulder, warm and approving. "You're a good Marine." "You were just reading the book, not the weather." Raising the seed packet, I added, "It's all in the details, son. Pay attention to the little things. That's where the truth is." As I turned away, I paused and looked back over my shoulder. "Just keep listening, Johnson. Don't ever stop." He nodded, standing quietly among the rows of garden supplies, watching me go, a silent salute to the truth that wisdom isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a soft voice carried on the wind and a lesson tucked inside a scarred old rifle. I could feel the shift, not only in Johnson, but across the entire unit. What started as resistance and skepticism slowly unraveled, replaced by a genuine hunger for the kind of knowledge you can't write down in manuals or buy in a store. Evenings after training, some of the younger Marines would linger near the benches, tossing grass stems between their teeth, or studying the way breeze cut through the range's battered flag. They'd shoot curious glances my way, sometimes working up the nerve to ask about a particular wind pattern or a shot that seemed impossible to read. Each question reminded me how deeply the old lessons mattered, and how easily they could fade in a world obsessed with screens and statistics. The next training week brought real transformation. The Marines shrugged off some of their bravado, sidling closer as I explained the subtle cues of nature. We sat in circles, dirt dusting our boots, and studied the dance of sunlight on swaying weeds, the shimmer of rising heat above the gravel, and the false promises found in the white ripples of a distant mirage. We practiced waiting, sometimes for an hour, until a shift in the breeze aligned just right. No one reached instinctively for their electronic gadgets. Instead, They learned to trust themselves. I challenged each Marine to take a reading with their body before ever confirming it on their expensive gear. For me, every lesson became a way to pass on what had been entrusted to me so many years ago. I shared stories, not of confirmed kills or medals, but of the blunders and close calls, those moments where listening to the rifle or watching the nervous twitch of leaves had meant survival. The Marines listened with heads bowed, a respect that was as humbling to receive as it was rare to find. Johnson transformed the most. Once rigid, now the first to volunteer for the trickiest practice shots, he began treating the wind as an adversary to outsmart, not a variable to curse. When he corrected a younger Marine, his tone shifted, no longer barking, but guiding, encouraging a process of tuning into the range. I saw the light of understanding in his face when a shot he called impossible only weeks ago now became routine. A few times the base commander, Colonel Harlow, dropped by unannounced to watch the new sessions. He'd stand at a respectful distance, arms crossed, a faint smile betraying his satisfaction. Sometimes he'd toss a challenge my way, ask the team to hit a target after a sudden wind change, or solve a new problem with the simplest equipment possible. Every time the Marines stepped up, not just for the Colonel's approval, but out of newly discovered confidence in their own sight and skill. The legend of the Taylor Wind Doctrine grew across the base. Snipers from other units began to drift in, eager to see the old groundskeeper who had quietly changed everything they thought they knew about marksmanship. They'd return to their own teams, spreading tales about reading wind through fluttering grass or trusting gut over gadget. It became a rite of passage, learning from Frank Taylor. Beyond the lessons, life settled into comfortable routine. I'd tend the base's flower beds, mow the grass, and greet Marines with a nod instead of a salute. I liked blending into the background, working with my hands until someone wandered by with a head full of questions. Sometimes it was Evans, sometimes a brand new private with the same uncertainty in their eyes I'd seen in Johnson just weeks before. They would ask haltingly, Sir, would you mind showing me how you spot the wind with just the grass again?" And I always would. I told them what the master sergeant once told me, how the rifle would never lie, how you had to learn the language of the wind and trust the hints nature offered if you only bothered to look. One crisp morning, as autumn threatened to turn the fields gold, the command post called for an all-hands brief. Word had spread, it seemed, about the results at Falcon Range. Now instructors from other bases, even old veterans from the capital, had arrived. I was asked to lead the demonstration. Johnson, Evans, and the entire team flanked me. No posturing, just respect and quiet excitement. I stepped onto the firing line, the M40 slung low and familiar. The hum of conversation died in the sunlight. I took a slow breath, tasted the subtle salt of the air, and let the years fall away. As I settled in, I reminded them all, the equipment changes, the doctrine grows, but the wind, she's the same as she's always been. Don't just measure her, listen. The shot rang true, as if the years themselves had lined up behind the bullet, and when the distant clang of steel echoed over the range, I knew that even as time moved forward, some truths would never fade. If you paid attention, even the quietest lessons could change the world.